Hello, my fine friends. Welcome back to Destination Discourse. I'm your host, Stuart Butler, joined again today. I'm excited to hear how excited he is with Adam Stoker.
This is, to this point in my life, the best day of my life because I get to be here with you, with Devyn on Destination Discourse. I just can't imagine a better place to be.
Yeah, and of course, at third leg to our stall, welcome Devyn Whitmire to the show. How are you doing today?
I am delighted to be here, honored to be asked, and excited to chat and learn and hear from you guys.
Well, we are big fans of the work you've been doing. For those of you who don't know Devyn, she's with SCPRT, South Carolina Parks, Recs, and Tourism. So we get to work really closely, but she has a phenomenal, my favorite podcast in the destination world, the Palmetto Porch.
Wow.
And she has done a tremendous job of storytelling. So that's what we're going to be talking about today is how that project came about and what she was thinking about when she was creating it and all the challenges and whatnot. We talk a lot here about the philosophy of storytelling, and I got to tell you, Devyn has done it. It is in action with Devyn, and it's been tremendously successful for her and all the communities around South Carolina. So we're excited to dig into that topic in a little bit, Devyn. All right, so do you want to drum roll this, Adam? I feel like seeing as you're getting more excited every episode about the intro, maybe we need to get more excited about the best segment in all of entertainment, especially
Listen,
tourism entertainment.
it's time to just let the jingle happen.
Okay,
Oh,
the
go ahead,
jingle.
Devyn.
I have to address this because I've listened to
Yeah.
all of the episodes thus far
Okay.
that are out,
Yeah.
and have loved them all. The jingle has been mentioned many times. As a listener of Destination Discourse, I'm not saying it needs to be a regular occurrence. Maybe we don't have the likes yet to buy into that, but I think we at least as an audience need to hear it once. Just
You know what, Devyn, I
there's a
knew I
great
was going to like
insight.
having you on.
we have to advocate for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I get, we want this to be a show for the community, right? And so if the community
Right.
has spoken, you representing the entire community, maybe we'll bring it in the next episode and then we'll let the community decide if they want to keep it or if they want to
There
put
you
it back
go.
in the trash where it belongs.
Yeah.
Because it's
You at least got to give us a listen, but I think
Okay.
it's been teased enough. We at least need to hear what AI has generated for Stu's
Okay.
News, because in my mind, all I hear is Blue's Clues. As as a parent,
Well,
Yeah.
I just
listen,
hear Blue's Clues, so we got to
Stuart,
know.
I think one of the most important parts of marketing is listening to your audience. And when your audience
Yeah.
requests something or demands something, you have
Yeah.
no choice at that point but to make it happen.
This is very true. We will heed your advice, Devyn. In
Stuart
next
is
episode,
regretting having me
we'll
on the
bring
show.
It's okay.
What's your
Yeah.
Venmo, Devyn?
I feel like this
I'll
was set
just
up
send
before
it.
the show. I don't know.
I'll email it to you.
That's hilarious. All right. So today's Stu's News is courtesy of Fox 25. And Devyn, you may want to plead the fifth on this one. We're getting into a state situation. I totally understand if you don't want to dig into this one. But this came from Fox 25, and it's basically saying that the local news in Oklahoma came out with an article questioning the validity of a contract with an agency that the state of Oklahoma was spending about $30 million a year in. And based on the question and the investigation, it seems like the state has decided to part ways with that agency. And it's just created a sort of a big question mark over the state and over DMOs in general about how we procure relationships. It was a local agency, and that agency is also getting $20 million from another state entity as well. And so I don't know, this is especially based on some of the conversations we had recently around Doge with Will Seckham. I think this is one of those that could have been avoided and is probably not a good look for the industry. So Adam, what's your take on this story?
Well, I've got a couple of comments. In reading through that article, there was a wording in there that I think is really important for us as an industry to be aware of. They said that $14 million flowed through that agency.
Yeah.
And I think this is where a lot of political and other stakeholders don't understand how an agency works, because there's two types of engagements with an agency if they're running your media. One is where they pay the media fees. So if you're running billboards, TV, radio, digital ads, all that kind of stuff, the agency is actually covering those expenses and then being reimbursed by the destination, by the client. And so when we look at the amount of money that they're accusing the agency of making on the deal, I think it's a little bit blown out of proportion, and the wording that they're using is a little unfair to both the DMO and the agency, because my question would be, well, how much of that money actually went to the agency? And one of the things that they mention is a retainer of $125,000 a month. Well, on a $30 million budget with as many moving parts and deliverables as they have, I don't think that retainer in and of itself is an unacceptable retainer for the agency to be charging for that level of investment. So at that point, it's like, okay, well, are they making media commissions on top of that? Because that's a question I would want the answer to. And then the other question is, or maybe not a question, but another statement is, maybe this is a good argument that destinations in general should place their own media on their own cards. And yes, the agency can make a commission or a markup or whatever, but the optics of running 14 million or 30 million through an agency, even if the agency's not making as much as it seems like it might be making off of that, I think from an optics perspective, we may want to consider having destinations be the person that buys the media that they're running.
Yeah, and there's some advantage to that. That's certainly what we do at Visit Myrtle Beach. We use multiple agencies, including Relic, to place some of our media and MMGY and others, and we try to, in all cases, pay the media vendor directly, right? If it's Facebook, it's Google, whatever, there's some advantage to that. If we put that on our credit card, we're accumulating points that we can reinvest into more tourism promotions, so there's a lot of advantages to that. And I think it helps with the transparency. And we talked a couple of weeks ago about this, and, not just the vendor selection, but also the optics to the average consumer that's going to read a headline. And our big risk as an industry is the headline, right? We operate in the court of public opinion, and as much as you and I and anyone watching this show knows the nuance of this 30 million is really only maybe a couple of million to 2 million going to this agency and the rest going to media vendors, no one's going to stop and take the time to understand that, right? They're just going to read, oh, these guys are throwing a ton of money at a local company, and it doesn't seem like it was necessarily procured the right way. And I got to say, I don't want to necessarily speak too much about the specific situation in Oklahoma, but, we've got to be prepared for these kind of questions. Every DMO has to be prepared for hard questions. And the worst thing we can do is say no comment or we're working on a statement, right? We've got to be prepared, because then it looks like you're covering stuff up. Then it looks like you don't really have your act together. And so I think we've all got to understand that we owe a responsibility to our community to be good stewards of the budget that we're endowed with, in that we're investing that money on behalf of the community. And therefore we have to, one, do everything above board. And I'm not saying that they didn't, right? We don't know the ins and outs of the situation. But two, you've got to be ready to defend every decision you've made, because you never know when an intelligent or an unintelligent question is going to come that perhaps has a negative spin to it. So it's just lack of preparation here is going to be what creates these kind of fires. And ultimately, cost people business and cost people jobs potentially.
Yeah, in looking at this, it's another indication that the Overton window is moving, and not to beat a dead horse like what I said on the Doge episode that we did with Will Seckham, but it is becoming more and more acceptable publicly to question government spending and government efficiency. And
it's fashionable, right? Yeah,
it's
not
fashionable.
Just excessive. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And with the numbers that we're talking about, especially at the state level DMO, if we're not telling the story correctly, if we're not proactively getting out in front of the message, these are the types of things we're going to be dealing with because of the size of numbers that people see on a budget.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So, go back, everyone, and listen to that Doge episode, Will Second, that we published a couple of weeks ago, because I think we really drill into this topic. But I'm gonna segue to the topic at hand today. I think we've beaten this dead horse. I'm gonna let Devyn breathe a little sigh of relief, because I know this is a sensitive subject, especially when you're coming from a state DMO as well. So, Devyn. 180. Let's switch. Let's talk about you. Let's talk about the Palmetto Porch podcast. As I said at the beginning, I am a huge fan of this show. I think it's the first time I remember the first time I listened to an episode. I don't know if I listened to the very first episode, but it was right after it launched, and I immediately texted Adam because we've been working on some podcasts. I'm like, dude, this is what we're trying to create. She nailed it, or they nailed it, right? I'm sure it was a team. You do a phenomenal job of storytelling. It doesn't feel like just another DMO podcast, because you're touching on people and passion and purpose and all the things that make a good story. You've got stakes, you've got, resolutions to conflicts. You've got everything in there that makes entertainment what it is. And so I would love to start at the beginning. Like, when did you know you wanted to create a podcast? Why was that? And then what led to this specific incarnation?
It's a bit convoluted, but
Okay.
I believe I first got the idea to do a podcast actually at eTourism Summit, which has historically, for me, been just a really good spurring of ideas.
Yeah.
I get inspired a lot by seeing what other DMOs are doing. And I think environments like that's essentially, it's show and tell. And while we never want to specifically copy, I think it's just a way to think of, how can I make this work for my destination? How can we approach a project like this and make it work for South Carolina and tell our story? And so I got the idea from eTourism Summit to, let's get in the audio space. And when I first thought about it, I really thought it was going to be more of it's a me thing. It's a grassroots, like I can come up with the story, and it was going to be, I was going to write out a script almost and just read it and put it out there, and very, very bare bones. And as I often do, my boss loves to get a phone call from me with, I have an idea. Or I write it up and I email it to her, and she looked at it, and the idea itself, and I think, Adam, maybe I mentioned this when we recorded back at the governor's conference, but the original idea was SC eccentricities, which, even saying it now, I'm like, what was I thinking? But I wanted to tell weird stories.
Yeah, say it out loud 10 times fast.
Right. I wanted to tell the odd stories of South Carolina, and the weird little places and gems that are just different. Hence the eccentricities. And specifically, Stuart, I don't know if you've heard of this. The idea that I pitched was about the UFO Welcome Center, which is no longer to be. But there's this little, someone created I don't even know how to describe it, but not the most beautiful thing, but very interesting. And I think I was thinking of it in terms of, like, I'm a content creator in some ways, and constantly thinking about, what are people going to engage with? And I thought, people are going to click on that. They're going to listen to that story because you hear UFO Welcome Center, it's like, what? And so that's what I presented to my boss. And she said, I love the idea for a podcast, but maybe let's, take it back to the incubator a little bit and think of maybe something else besides.
Maybe not start with UFOs. Let's work our way to
start with
UFOs
for South Carolina.
Yeah.
And then I did. I kind of sat on it. And then it really, when I said it was convoluted, and I don't want to go on too long because I'm a talker, but we ended up, it became a brand thing and something we were going to do much bigger on a larger scale, like with the help of our agency, because we have a brand ambassador named Darius Rucker who was contracted to do a podcast with us. And so we kind of then decided, we do want to do a podcast. Devyn's idea, maybe not the best. So let's circle back to the drawing board and kind of build it around Darius. And then I thought, well, why not people? Why you know, and that came from conversations with sitting down with other people on our hall at PRT, and then also sitting down with a couple of people from our agency. And it was very, you know, drawing board, random, like, hey, I need help to talk this out. Darius is involved. That's big. The agency's like, I thought this was just going to be, you know, me boots on the ground, kind of little thing. And now it's a lot bigger, and I want it to be good. And so this thought of, people and in the South, porches are a really iconic thing. It's not a truly only Southern thing. A lot of people sit on their porch, but it's an image that is very associative with the South.
Yeah,
And
it invokes an emotion too, right? That's sitting
yeah,
there with someone on the porch, meeting, greeting, you know, what we call visiting with someone in the South.
yeah,
You know, it's very comfortable
exactly,
and very intimate, which I think works
exactly,
perfectly for this medium for audio. Yeah.
exactly. And it's interesting that you said you started listening at the beginning. I think we're in our third season now, and I feel like I'm finally, as a host, and really kind of understanding those storytelling elements that you brought
hmm
out, when it comes to the hero's journey and how they've
hmm
left home to go on a journey and then they come back, and seeing
hmm
those themes across all of the conversations that I've gotten to have with people. um, it really has become what I hoped from the beginning of, it's just people telling their stories. And it's been challenging in some ways of, not many people love to talk about themselves. And especially when you're talking to someone who is really passionate about their business, and they
Devyn,
say,
you should
well,
have met
actually,
Stuart a lot earlier. You wouldn't have made that statement.
That's funny.
yeah, I I've had people who sit down and like, wait, you want to ask about my childhood? You want to ask about,
Yeah.
you know, this really challenging illness that I went through. Which, and it does, Stuart, you and I talked about this. You were really kind to meet with me after the first season to kind of set, you know, get some feedback and maybe look to changes or thoughts that I could approach for season 2 and now into season 3. And you said it takes investigative work to find, you know, the people that you want to talk to. And really we kind of dive into their stories before I even start recording, to help
Yeah.
with framing the questions and already having that story frame in mind, um, to help best tell their story.
Yeah.
And so that's what we've kind of ended with, not ended. It's I'm hoping for many more seasons, but that's
Yeah.
where we've landed
The
at this
place you've
point.
reached today. Yeah.
Yeah, with the
Yeah. It's
show. And yeah.
It is cool. Did you have a hard time getting buy-in? Obviously, Dolly is a visionary and a great. She's a bit of a risk taker too, and she obviously trusts you and the team. And but did you get any pushback internally when you came up with, say, hey, let's create a podcast? Because at the time it wasn't, you know, not every DMO was doing this kind of stuff back then. You know, it was a few years ago now. So did you get much pushback?
For the podcast itself, no, I think it really, for us, it was timing. I think we're really aligned with our agency and worked really closely together. And I think they were already thinking in some ways of, hey, let's kind of get into the audio space too. And then it just was kind of kismet that I pitched my idea to Dolly, and she's like, well, we were actually talking about this in another meeting. And that's how a lot of my projects work. I don't know. It just happens. Timing works out, and
Yeah.
thankfully, I have a really supportive boss who is fine with me putting my face on things. I don't know. I've found, as a local, I've only ever worked and lived in South Carolina. I feel like I've in a way made all my projects really personal in a way. And that's worked, I think. And up to this point, I don't know what's the discourse of having a
Yeah.
face attached to to so many of the DMO's projects. But I
Yeah.
didn't get a ton of pushback. No.
Okay, well, that's good. Yeah, for sure. Have you gotten much feedback? Because obviously it proliferates beyond the DMO itself into, and you guys are in the, you know, state capital in Columbia, but you're also reaching into, and what I love about the show, one of the many things is that you're reaching into the sort of the backwaters of South Carolina, right? A lot of your small quirky towns, and you did one, you've done like the origins of sweet tea and chicken bog and all this other stuff, and it's just these interesting, fascinating backwater stories that you're bringing to the forefront. But have you gotten much feedback from outside of the DMO itself, from like whether that's elected officials or folks from other communities that are really, are you getting any feedback on any of that?
Yes, and that is ultimately where I see success. For me, that's my measure, my meter, if you will, is when I have a local DMO tell me, "Thank you so much for coming and telling this story." I try to incorporate our partners as much as I can with these projects that I do, and looping them in and asking for their advice at the front, because then you have their buy-in as you go forward. As a state, it can be really hard. We do have a large landscape of people and stakeholders to serve, and as well as residents. And so any project that I do, whether it's a series I did a few years ago or now with the podcast, you're going to notice that every tourism region has representation. I make a point to do that. It is a real challenge sometimes of making sure I am finding the right people to speak to, and those people who have really important and interesting stories but it makes it so much more meaningful to me and to our partners to know that every region is being represented and what we're doing as a state DMO. And so, yeah, tons more buy-in that way. And it's great to get that positive feedback from them, to know that you do see us and you are working, because, the Visit Myrtle Beaches you guys do so much work, and rising tides lift all boats, right? But you, Stuart, really understand this. Of like, when I talk to you, you were like, I want you to talk about Loris. I want you to talk about Conway, who are, these outlier towns from Myrtle Beach. And I've always seen that as my mission personally, is to, yes, Charleston is fantastic and I'd love for you to go, but I also want you to drive up the road and go to Somerville. So it's been really positive.
What have been some of the big challenges along the way? Have you run into any roadblocks? And let's frame this for our audience, because there's a lot of people out there. I think Adam's been on the road talking about every DMO should have a podcast for, it feels like 20 years, and it just feels that way because it's Adam, but it's really probably been 3 or 4. But there's a lot of folks I think want to do something like this, but they're intimidated. And you even sort of touched on this a minute ago when you were saying, like, it went from this small thing, it was just going to be me, and then it sort of grew into something bigger and this big, hairy, audacious goal that you wanted to do. And obviously you're there, you came through that. And I always feel like with these, a lot of times the hardest part of it is just getting started. But what would your advice, what have you learned along the way? And what would your advice be to this audience, the DMOs that are watching or listening that are thinking about it, they're teetering and they're not quite sure? What would you say to them?
You're absolutely right. Getting started, I think, can be the hardest part of making the decision to do this. But I think even worse is that next step of, okay, I've decided I'm going to do this. I've made this commitment and I have a budget, and oh wait, no, I actually have to do it. And I think for me, in any time I've been presented with this, I have buy-in from my leadership. I have, I've been given a budget, which is more than some DMOs maybe could say. I don't know. I'm very blessed in that way, but I'm not sure how to do this. And so I need to ask questions. I need to go to someone and reach out to my network and whatever that looks like for a DMO, and ask for help. Because you don't know what you don't know. And so that's always been my first step, is to think, who can help me accomplish this? And once that first decision is made, then that ball can get rolling. And for me, it was, okay, what is this idea actually going to look like? And then for us, it was like, well, what scale are we going to do this? My agency had never produced a podcast before. And obviously I hadn't either. And so then we had to do some research in the space to find a company that could help us accomplish this. And then it became, I had to interview with producers. I was really hands-on with that because I knew we were going to be working really closely together. I need to preface that for all of the listeners. I have not done this on my own. I've had help every single step of the way. And I have no shame in saying this is not my podcast. This is a team brand podcast. I couldn't have done it alone. And Pod People was a big part of that. They found a producer and she was a Southern lady who had worked on shows before, and she stuck with me every season since. And we understood each other, and she understood even the way, like, she would write, we would help write voiceover, and she knew how I would say something. Like it was just this chemistry that I couldn't have
some
asked for more.
fixins, some y'alls, some sugars, some Southern flair to it.
I don't know if I say sugar a lot. Maybe I call my daughter sugar. I don't know. But yes, I do. I think it's that next step in asking for help and figuring out, here's what I don't know. Let's find someone who does, and go from there.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the mistakes that some DMOs make, is they just lean on their agency, their one group or team for everything. And, you know, one of the things we've had a lot of success with, you know, we just launched a TV show, Traveling the Spectrum, last week is when it came out, according to the chronological order of when this came out. But actually it's a couple of weeks now, but it's out. Realistically, the day we're recording it actually came out, but you know, the magic of when we publish. But we couldn't have done that without finding a production company that knew TV. You know, they had worked on things like Trading Spaces before. They understood how to not just produce TV, but how to help with distribution and things like that. And then obviously we brought in the Relic team to help promote it because they're experts at promotion. But a lot of DMOs, I think, they want to start a podcast, they want to start a project, and they just go to their agency of record and say, let's do this thing. And then you're all learning together, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think you can accelerate things. You can be a little more efficient by bringing in an expert. In your case, you brought in a podcast company that knew how to produce and publish podcasts. So yeah, I think that's a really smart approach.
Yeah. And you mentioned Traveling the Spectrum. I have to say, I watched it this morning as I was getting ready, and you already made me cry today. So the show, your team, it's so good. It's so needed in the space. And I think personally, and I mentioned this to you, Stuart, back at Esto in August, I really identify with this and didn't know how much I was going to identify with it, because I do have a child who's neurodivergent. He is not specifically diagnosed with autism, but I didn't even realize how much these families' stories were going to register with me. I'm so grateful that you included the parents in those dynamics. And I'm so grateful to the families that came on and were so open and honest to share, because it can be a really isolating, sometimes even shameful thing to, to talk about. And so I am so grateful that those stories are being shared. And thank you for, arguably it's not hard to make me cry. I'm a weepy person, but episode 1, and I'm really looking forward to
it's made me cry a lot too. And just wait, I sorry for making you cry in episode 1, but you just wait till episode 4, 5, 6.
I'm ready.
It is, you're going to be blubbing like a baby. But one of the things that was interesting when we started that project was we said, there are shows out there like Love on the Spectrum that have really focused on the individual that's neurodiverse, and they're great, and they're bringing awareness, and they're destigmatizing and reducing the shame and all that stuff. But we really haven't seen the impact autism has on the family unit, and so that's one of the things we wanted to focus on when we brought these families to Myrtle Beach. But we, one of the things I've learned, I don't have a child with any kind of neurodiversity. They have their own individual quirks, right? But they're not diagnosed with any kind of neurodiversity. Worst we've dealt with is anxiety, but it's one of the things I see watching this. Even though I'm not directly, similar to these parents in a lot of ways, I really am in a lot of other ways. Like the hopes, the dreams, the fears these families have for their children are the same. Like a parent is a parent, a child is a child, and these happen to be children with neurodiversity. But the journey all of these families go on is one that will benefit every person that watches it, because it shows the value of travel. It shows the value of family, and it shows how stepping outside of your comfort zone. Chris Hill, one of the parents of the children of Miko, was on that, and he said, he tries to protect his daughter, and in what he's realized through travel is that maybe he's doing her a disservice at times, because giving her these experiences helps her grow. And this Miko is a great example. When she came here about a year ago, she was completely nonverbal, and now Precious and her are doing a lot of videos on YouTube, and she is talking up a storm. And some of that is the result of her having this experience and being exposed to new things. So it's a phenomenal show. Shameless plug again, go watch Traveling the Spectrum on Peacock. But it's about storytelling, right? And that's what you've been doing with your podcast. And I think you focused on people, not the places. And I think that's the mistake some DMOs make, right? Is we're going to talk about Loris, and Loris has this, and Loris has that. And well, let's talk about something unique about Loris. Like, it's where chicken bug was invented, and they have this bug off, and they do all this other crazy stuff. And he is the unofficial mayor of Loris, who's going to talk about it, because he's kind of a crazy guy who also dresses up like a chicken and calls himself Cluck Norris, right?
He does.
Like, that's just a fascinating story. So it's about people.
What's interesting about my interview with Kobe is when you listen to that episode, he talks about the surgeries that he had as a child up at the top.
Mm-hmm.
That nugget didn't come through until after we were pretty much done recording.
Yeah.
And then we sat back down, and he was one that I think it was a challenge for him to talk about himself. He's such an advocate for Loris, but while he was so comfortable and confident to talk about his town and Chicken Bog and Cluck Norris, he wasn't really giving me much about Kobe. And we finally came at the end, and he brought up, well, I didn't really want to talk about this, but I had all of these brain surgeries as a child, and the pharmacy would open up for my mom at 2 or 3 a.m. to get my medicine on my way to MUSC. And that's why I'm so invested and have come back to Loris. And I was like, why have we not been talking about that the whole conversation? Yeah. That's the good stuff. And he thought I didn't want to hear that people wouldn't want to hear that. And that makes it so much more meaningful, and yes, Loris is a great town. You should go visit, but it's because of people like Kobe. And I think it's really interesting, the episode on residents I was listening to with Amir, and the importance of the resident. I kept thinking too, well, your residents are also ambassadors. They make or break a travel experience for a visitor. And so if your residents aren't happy, that's going to impact a visitor who is coming to your destination, which is something in South Carolina. We're so proud of our people and hospitality in that term. And so you want that to come through more than anything. And so to me, it's a no-brainer that people should be the center of our messaging and our storytelling, because it's our brand. It's who we are.
Beautiful places and smiling faces, right? South Carolina.
Exactly.
That's exactly right.
I'd love to maybe go through a little bit of an exercise with you, Devyn, if that's okay, because I think we have a lot of destinations listening that have a lot of questions about, like, okay, how do I actually do this? And as you guys both know, because you've listened to my content, I talk a lot about destinations need to have owned content and storytelling at the center. But what I'm going to do for this exercise is actually take the challenger role and ask you questions, because destinations are going to have stakeholders that ask these questions when they want to create an asset, a storytelling asset like this, that might not necessarily be tied directly from, I spent this dollar and it generated a visitor, right? And so I'd like to ask you a few questions, and let's do maybe even like rapid fire, where we get through several questions. But number one is, you devote a ton of time, energy, bandwidth, and money into your show. how do you justify that to the people that want to see a tie from the money and time and energy that you spend and revenue generated?
Ooh, these are hard hitting. I mean, I think it's hard to explain to a resident who's maybe even I didn't know how much tourism and economic development go together. How having someone that awareness that content can create, getting eyeballs on your destination, and ultimately influence a travel conversation, a travel decision, and then how that's going to impact a local economy. So I think it's trying to connect those dots to who's asking. This tiny local little antique shop in Lawrence, South Carolina, they might have some local traffic. If we're doing a podcast or a reel on our social media that showcases them, that's a lot more eyeballs than they had before of what they could do themselves. And it's potentially going to affect travel decisions to people who are looking to make a road trip while they're visiting family to let's ride up the road and just walk around and pop in and maybe make a purchase and raise that bottom line.
Yeah,
Yeah,
great. And you've been
I
doing
love
it.
what she did there, Adam, because a lot of folks will start and end with the data, right? The metrics. In what I know Destinations International has been talking about, and a lot of sophisticated folks have been talking about more, is you got to tie that to a story, right? If you just throw out my ROI on this is this, or I'm getting this much views and this much cost per view or whatever, it goes over the head of the people, the stakeholders, right? And so you got to tie it back to that small antique owner and how it impacted them. So great answer, Devyn.
Awesome. I agree, by the way. The next question I have, though, is you've been doing this for 3 seasons, right? What are you doing to communicate the value that this show is bringing to your stakeholders? Like, is that done in email format? Are you speaking at the conference about what's happened with the show? Sounds like you're trying to avoid speaking at the conference in the upcoming conference, but tell me what you're doing to communicate the value the show is bringing to the community.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do include it often in all of our industry newsletters. And that's like a transactional thing in a way of we let partners and stakeholders know what we're doing and also ask for their buy-in and their input. My email is always out there. Some of the best recommendations I've had for guests have come from partners who say, I saw this person would be fantastic to talk to. And that's my hope, is that it's generating more great stories to come. And we will have, I think there's going to be a whole activation around it this year at the governor's conference. Nice. I think I'm not going to be able to hide in the back of our command center this time. And they're going to have me out there talking to our partners and connecting with them over the stories that we're telling on the Palmetto Porch. It's interesting. I'm really comfortable on camera and putting my face on things, but when it comes to it being shared with our partners, sometimes I'm a little bit more apprehensive. I don't know why. There's a weird disconnect there. I think because I'm just so team oriented and it is a team thing, it feels odd in some ways to get a lot of credit for things that I did not do alone. But yes, we definitely put it out there in newsletters, on social media. I'm emailing them and sharing what we're doing, so they know and can then let their stakeholders know.
Great. Okay, I'm gonna ask you one more question, then I'm gonna let Stuart get in on this. But one of the questions that I get a lot is, I don't know if I have enough stories to tell. And sometimes my response can be a little off-putting because I'm like, then maybe you might not be in the right role if you're running a destination and you're not sure what stories to tell. And so I'm wondering, every destination has low-hanging fruit. Like there's the top 3 stories that everybody loves to tell. And it's like, okay, we've got episode 1, 2, and 3, right? How do you find that next level of stories and decide what is worth telling as a full podcast episode versus this would make a great Instagram post?
That's a really good question. Going back to the original of like enough stories to tell, I think I've made it easy on myself because we've got how many thousands and millions of people in South Carolina, and we all have a story. You'll notice that a lot of the people that I talk to aren't true locals. Some have, migrated here and have planted roots. Others have been in South Carolina, left and come back, and are rehoming in a way. So I think I look at it that way of, I have millions of people to choose from who have a connection to South Carolina, and their story is going to be unique. It comes from that doing that digging beforehand, and kind of investigating to find what are those key things we want to hit on that make, the itsy bitsy spider, in a way, like that true, like easiest story that you can tell. My 7-year-old could tell me about the itsy bitsy spider, but what would make that even more important would be knowing the spider's name and why they're going up the water spout. And so I think that changes the mindset of someone who is looking to tell stories of doing that digging. Yeah, I think I kind of agree with your statement is, yeah, maybe you're in there's just a plethora of things that we can do.
Yeah.
And that makes me excited as the DMO, as a marketer, as a creative person, that there are a million ideas. It's really finding the mechanism with which to tell it.
Yeah, and having the courage to look as well, and then putting the resources behind it. I agree with you, Devyn. I think everyone has a story. There's not a single person I've met, once I've spent enough time with them, where we don't get to something really fascinating or interesting. Other than Adam, there's nothing interesting about Adam. But from everyone else, like everyone's
I'm
got a
taking a
story.
beating today.
I know you probably started it. I think you took a swipe about something early on. But I think, when you're creating content about your community, involve your community. And so Devyn said something earlier, which is she gets emails from stakeholders saying, hey, this person would be a good person to talk to. So this isn't something you're doing in isolation, right? Once it's out in the wild, once you've done the first or second episode and you start engaging the community and asking the community to share, you're not going to run out of stories. Because if someone finds it fascinating or interesting or unique or novel, whatever it is, then you're going to have an audience for that. And so your job is to sort of get introduced to what those things are. You'll probably know a handful. The community can introduce you to a ton more. But then doing that investigative work, like Devyn said, doing the groundwork to really drill down into the essence of that story. What is the hero's journey here, or the prodigal son, or the whatever the archetype story is? Find it and then go tell that story. And tell it to the audience. Don't, you're not just having a conversation with a person about their story. You're really walking an audience through the world from that person's perspective. And so I agree with both of you. I think if you can't think of stories to tell in your destination, then you either need to spend more time engaged with your community, or you need another job, because every destination, every person has a story, multiple stories.
And I want to comment too on one of the things that Devyn, that you're doing that I think is really interesting, and it actually speaks to an episode that we did with Sarah Peter on a previous episode of Destination Discourse, and we talked about that the destination's role is to incubate some of the stories and things that need to be shared with the world. It takes a lot of work to sift through the stories that exist in a destination and then amplify the ones that are going to resonate with both the residents and the visitors. And it seems like that's really at the core of what you've done with the Palmetto Porch, is sifting through all the stories, and not all the stories because there's an unlimited number of stories because there's so many people, but you're amplifying the stories that are going to help build a long-term sustainable impact for the state of South Carolina. And that's what I'm really excited to watch you continue to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This has been great, Devyn. If there's any final words of advice you can give to the folks listening, there's one or two people, it might be Adam's mom, our only listener, is listening right now and saying, I'm really close, I almost want to do it. What would your words of encouragement be to push Adam's mom over the edge and make her launch that podcast?
Yeah. I think I've learned a lot, as you do when you're embarking on a new project and something that's different and challenging for your organization. I think the thing that I've learned the most is that question of, what have we done prior, and how can this be on brand for South Carolina and telling our story, but in a unique way that's going to identify with more people. And so I would encourage people to kind of look at things as, you know, this story might not have been what I would have originally thought was going to tell South Carolina's story or your DMO's story. But if you're asking the right questions, sometimes they might be hard. If you're doing that investigative work, you're going to find gold. You're going to find something, and it might not look like it at first, but somebody's going to identify with that person, identify with their journey, and identify with them. And then now they're going to associate them with your destination. And so then you're top of mind. So it's just looking at stories in a different way. And I think you can do that not just with a podcast, you can do that with every aspect of your marketing, your content strategy, if you asking those questions and looking at it from a different perspective.
That's great. Yeah. Well, you're a great storyteller, for sure, Devyn. We really are big fans of the show. If someone isn't aware of the show, we've said the name several times. It's the Palmetto Porch. It's available everywhere that they can get podcasts. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's the Palmetto Porch, and I'm going to sound like a host. You can find it at scpalmettoporch.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Awesome. Devyn, thank you for being on today. Adam, if they want to reach out to you, where can they do that?
Adam at relicagency.com, or you can find me on Tourism IQ.
Great. Any final words of wisdom from you, sir?
Well, I just want to respond to what Devyn's advice was. And I would say you can't spend your way to relevance through paid media. There's plenty of states that have a bigger budget than South Carolina. But creating stories that are collected in an evergreen vehicle like a podcast repository, these are assets that can be used forever. And I think that's the way you differentiate yourself, is by leveraging your budget to create evergreen assets that are actually going to make a long-term impact. And I think that's a brilliant strategy that you're employing there, Devyn.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And, you know, not just the audience and the evergreenness of the content, but you also have now an asset you can use when you have fan tours, when you are doing PR pitches, all these other ancillary benefits. I mean, we've used the Loris one because Loris is in our jurisdiction of promotion. So we've used the Loris episode to introduce people to the concept of chicken bog, you know, so it's an asset you can use multi-dimensionally, and like you said, it's evergreen. So that's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for being on here today.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead, Devyn. Final words from you.
I'm sorry. I think
you're good.
So that is one thing we have done is, I think we're in our third season now. We filmed all of them this season. And so we had a lot more content to use for YouTube Shorts, for Instagram Reels, for paid media to put it out there. But organically, we were seeing a lot of traction. So we've evolved even then. So even if it's just taking the first step, if it's just, you know, the voice file, you know, we've definitely evolved, and it can grow as you learn. And your stories are going to get even more meaningful that way too.
Yeah, it's a good advice, is walk before you can run, right? When we started the Fuel podcast, my previous career, we literally spent $80 on a Yeti microphone and stuck it in the middle of the table and started recording, you know, and it was phenomenal success. So you don't have to invest big. You don't have to go hire an agency to do it. You can just go on YouTube, learn how to record, learn how to publish a podcast. It can be really inexpensive, but you know, and then you can grow into something as spectacular as the Palmetto Porch once you cut your teeth on the simple versions. But Devyn, thank you for being on here today. Everyone for listening, thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe, please rate, review, go watch Traveling the Spectrum on Peacock. And until next time, this has been Destination Discourse.